morning. My name is Clyde Robinson, Executive Vice President of External Affairs and Diversity here at UCAN. And we are absolutely delighted to host the Chicago Community Trust and the African American Legacy group here this morning. Wanted to just tell you a little bit about UCAN. UCAN is 149 years old. It will be 150 next year. One of Chicago's oldest, but yet most innovative social service organizations. And we pride ourselves on helping young people who suffered trauma become future leaders. We have about 18 sites across the greater Chicagoland area, 700 plus staff, and serve over 15,000 youth, children, and families. 86% of that service population are African American, another 7% Hispanic Latino, and it's our job as custodial to help our families and our youth become successful in life. And we're here at our signature campus in North Lawndale. I can actually say award-winning campus now. When we first came to North Lawndale, we wanted to come in and add value to the community, and not in a superficial or symbolic way, but a substantive way. And for those of you who know, construction is not it's not for the faint of heart, especially in this city. There's some real demands, and the city just upped their minority business and women business enterprise numbers. Went from 24 and 4 to 26 and 6. And as leaders at UCAN, we felt that it's not enough. And our minimum goal to get this campus built was 50% MBE, WBE. And we were fortunate enough, and it helped me grow up as a professional learning this construction stuff. We were able to hit 60.7%. About $23 million went to Black, Hispanic, and women-owned businesses. So the Federation for Women Contractors gave us the Project of the Year. Ms. Gale just presented UCAN with the LISC Community Neighborhood Development Awards for this project as well. And then we want to continue to be an asset from community hiring. We're the 6th largest employer in North Lawndale right now. Really focused on hyper-local, how we can help revitalize this particular community. We know clearly the history, Dr. King being able to, this is one of the only areas he was able to speak in the past, and then how once the riots started, this was the community that was burned down. And it's never really come back, and it's UCAN from the board, our senior leadership team, and everybody we serve. We want this community to be one of the best communities in the country. So we're really laser focused on making that happen. And we're delighted to have you here. We'd love to keep having communication and a relationship with each one of you. And good luck with the conversation today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm AdultISM Brown. I'm chair of the African American Legacy Fund. We're an initiative of the Chicago Community Trust. We were founded in 2003. Our mission is to support the African American community and to improve African American lives. We do that through 3 initiatives. The first is grant making, supporting grassroots, Black-led African American organizations throughout Chicago. Secondly, by convening groups such as this to talk about issues that are important to the African American community. And finally, most importantly for us, is engaging this notion of collective philanthropy. How can we as an African American community come together and collectively support all the work that needs to happen in our community? That is what the African American Legacy Fund is all about. It's my pleasure to introduce Tim Jones. He'll be leading the work today. I know we're all here for one reason, myself included, that's to hear from millennials. And what do they have to say about the issues that are important to them? So do join me in welcoming Tim Jones to the microphone.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Andreessen. I get a chance to sit on the board and work alongside Andreessen and a few other board members here in the room. Can you wave your hands or shake your? There you go. So yeah, this is a team, a few people on the team. But each year, as a part of the on-the-table conversations that happens all throughout the city of Chicago, African American Legacy kind of serves as the springboard for all of the conversations that will take place throughout the day. And so last year we were having a race, equity, and economics conversation with the Chicago Urban League. The year before that we were having a conversation in the Walnut Room about succession and transfer and black leadership. And then the year before that we were hanging out at BMO and at Corliss Stomping Ground having a conversation. But this year we wanted to hear from the largest generation in our country. And we wanted to talk about this idea of civic and political engagement and how they're getting it right. Shockingly, the largest generation in our country is getting this right, and they have a different perspective. As a matter of fact, their favorite beverage is other. Their favorite beer is none of the above. And so they have a unique perspective that they add to the conversation, and we believe that it drifts into the world of politics and civic engagement. So we have an eclectic group that's going to be moderated and led by an eclectic, smart woman doing some great work at McKeeva Challenge, and she's the CEO of McKeeva Challenge, excuse me. And Michelle Morales is going to be the moderator and take us the rest of the way. But thank you for being here.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning. Early. Thank you, Tim, for the introduction. My name is Michelle. I'm the CEO of McFA Challenge. We're an organization that runs chapters in Chicago, Los Angeles, and DC, specifically with the purpose of training young people to become active and engaged citizens. We firmly believe that by working with young people and creating and demanding space for their voice to be at the table, that will create and move forward a more inclusive democracy. And so I'm truly honored to be moderating this panel today. This is an issue near and dear to my heart. Obviously, I wouldn't be working at MCFA if it wasn't. And really am excited to have this panel sort of push this issue forward. So just for the audience, a reminder that millennials, when we talk about this generation, it tends to be between the ages of 18 to 29, though some people do include 30 up to 35 in the definition. So when we're thinking about millennials, it can be 18 all the way to 35. You're welcome. Because there's a lot, there's a lot of misconceptions about this generation, who belongs in it, but also what they believe and what they fight for. And what I hope is that the panel highlights their issues and really what they need moving forward and what they need from us, Generation X, baby boomers, in order for their issues to continue forward. So if I could have each of the panelists, starting with Rudy, introduce yourselves, where you work, and a little bit of what your organization does, that would be great, and then we'll go into the questions.
All right, good morning, y'all.
Good morning.
It's a beautiful day. I'm Rudy. I am the Deputy Director at Chicago Votes. Chicago Votes is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that engages in leadership development and civic engagement activities for that very broad 17 to 35-year-old population. Some of the things that we do leadership development programming, we do advocacy work on issues that matter to young people, and we try to just prepare young people to be the civic actors that we know that they can be.
I'm Aurora Arope. I work for Willow Creek Community Church. Previously, I was the capital campaign manager that led the Chicago campus to have a permanent home. So I did that in the last year. Now I work for Compassion and Justice, and that's our initiative to really be engaged civically, locally, and globally as well too. So I just started that 2 weeks ago, literally. So I'm still in the ground roots and hopefully to be engaged in the Chicago landscape pretty soon.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Deja Boyd. I actually work a youth at MCFA Challenge, and I am a part of the Youth Council. The MCFA Challenge is broken up into councils, and each council has a particular responsibility with regards to helping youth-related issues. And so recently we have been collaborating and coming up with recommendations to change policy impacting youth health in Chicago, meeting with policymakers, presenting presentations, things of that nature. So.
Hello, my name is Devontae Boston. I'm a second year public ally at Southwest Organizing Project. And some of the things I do, I'm the coordinator for the Voice program, which I've been a part of since I was a freshman in high school. And we're also working on the SWIC project, bringing more businesses along the 63rd Strip from Halsted to Pulaski. And something that the Voice Project is working on now, about to pass our third law in Springfield, HB 4208, that's going to give principals the option to bring in more mental health resources and trauma-informed resources to the school. And I'm also the co-founder of the TGI movement, and we focus on youth engagement and community development.
Good morning, y'all. My name is Michael Simmons. I am the founder and CEO of Blue Sky Strategies and Company, a consulting firm that focuses on 4 areas: intentional urban planning, youth empowerment, government accountability, and then racial equity and public policy. I also am a photographer on the side, and a lot of my focus is on black neighborhoods and black spaces and debunking a lot of narratives around those places. Native Chicagoan, and it's good to be here.
Oh, you guys hold on to that.
Oh, okay.
So as it was mentioned earlier, the Millennial Generation, and I'm going to, if you notice the definition starts at 18, that does not even include high school students, right? And if you're not aware, if you're 17, if you turn 17 for the primaries, you can vote in the primaries as long as you're 18 for the general election, right? So 17-year-olds now can begin in the voting process in Illinois. And so they're the largest voting bloc, right? Millennials. And so they outnumber baby boomers and Generation X by 2 million more voters. This is according to the Brookings Institute. So how should we, and I'm just gonna throw out questions to the panel, anyone can pick it up and try to answer it. So call to action to the audience here, call to action to whoever's watching on the camera there. Better engage millennial voters. What space needs to be created to better engage millennial voters? Not everybody at once jumped at that question. Sorry to get y'all with.
It's Tuesday, I'm just gonna jump right on in. I think the first thing we have to do is get new people running for office. I think there's a traditional narrative around people who have big money and people who have clout that a certain type of person should be a candidate, particularly for high office, and I think that has to stop. Young millennials, and I'm speaking as a millennial, I think are not excited by uninspiring, unintentional, unthoughtful politicians, and so if we're going to get more millennial engagement, I think we got to first look at who we're actually slating for office. That has direct implications for people who are recruited, people who are organizing in the community, and then people who may be non-traditional candidates, small business owners, moms, grandmothers, all of these people that have probably a lot of good sense to bring to elected office, and if they were running, I think a lot more millennials would actually show up and vote for them and actually go and volunteer to help on their campaigns. That's just my thought.
Anyone else?
I think we need to normalize the concept of radical individuals, right? Radical in the sense that we are the generation that's willing to get the root of the problem, right? We're not surface, we're not put a Band-Aid on the solution. So that means we're going to create discomfort in the environment. We're going to create discomfort in the room, so that if it's normalized, that gives us a sense of like empowerment. The sense that, you know, the office, the person running the office might not look like a conventional politician, right? As we know it today, right? It might be a person who's literally wearing their Nike shoes and like yoga pants, and they like have something to say, and we shouldn't discredit that person because they don't fit an image that we're so used to as a society. So.
And to piggyback off of that, at Chicago Votes, we engage a lot of young people of color from the South and West sides. We have a really diverse alumni-ship, but what we find is that a lot of our young people come from the Black community, and something that we need to make more comfortable for folks, or uncomfortable for folks, is changing the culture of politics and where it happens. Right now, when you think about politics, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Marble buildings, suits, Springfield, spaces that don't look like ours, faces that don't look like ours. And I think that's really important that young people feel comfortable to take up space and to be able to hold space in the same way that elected officials hold space. So what do we need to do as a group? We need to be creative. We need to allow young people to change the culture of politics. If that means that they express themselves best through spoken word, then allow them to do so. If that means that it's expressing themselves through dance, allow them to do so. Allow us to hold space for young people to express their political beliefs in a language that they feel most comfortable expressing it through. I think those are some of the ways that we can start to shift how politics happens and where it happens.
I think we can also try to create more in terms of education and just awareness about political processes and where you can vote and how long the voting polls are open. I worked as an election judge, and I was frequently asking my friends, are y'all voting? And a lot of them didn't know the wheres, the whens, and just the process of it. And it made me sad because a lot of youth, don't get the opportunity to be an election judge. And just at least in my friend group, I'm not sure about how aware youth are in my older range or whatever. But I think it starts with there. I feel like we could communicate, we could find more diverse ways to communicate with youth, specifically reaching through them through their channels, particularly social media. We could reach out to organizations like Make the Challenge and all the organizations that you all are part here that specifically work with youth and use that channel that is already existing to just communicate the importance of voting and the awareness of who's running and who are the candidates and what do these positions do once they are or aren't elected and things like that.
I think a couple things, like a program like Voice, it's kind of like Civics in real life. So, they get to experience going to Springfield and talking to the legislators and being the lobbyists. Instead of just hearing it inside of a classroom, it just goes in one ear and out the other. Having them experience it, they might care more. They might, try to do some research by themselves, and just finding a new and fun way to engage millennials and the generation that's under me. Cause I went with one of my friends to go vote back in March, and he didn't know half the people that was on that list. The only people that we really see is JB, cause he's everywhere. Snapchat advertisement, he's all over Facebook. It's just finding a new way to engage us and to inform us about what's going on in politics.
So what's interesting is that the second question I have, a lot of you hit on, right? And it's educating the audience on the barriers that exist, right? In terms of really fully engaging millennials, or for millennials to feel fully engaged for this generation. Some of you hit on the lack of representation, right, in candidates, or this very traditional type of candidate that's put forward that millennials may not see themselves in. Some of you mentioned not using diverse communication. David and Devonta, you both mentioned that, right? Candidates are not using social media. They're not using other ways of, informing people about their platform. What other barriers exist?
Thank you. So the first one that comes to mind is definitely a stigma. Before I was involved with Make the Challenge, and I, did things like work in my the voting polls, I definitely had a stigma towards politics, and I feel like it's the stigma comes from a learned hopelessness that the politics, it isn't for us. It isn't going to help us, and to combine that with disappointing people in offices not working in our best interests. I feel like over time, when you combine that with lack of education about our capabilities and our past involvement in politics and the specifics of where you can vote and all that good stuff, the ignorance by circumstance in combination with the stigma towards politics not being for colored people, for us, I feel like that changes our youth perception of politics, and it encourages the belief that even if I do vote, it's not going to matter. And even if I felt this way about this thing, I can't change it, because of these people that have came in the past that disappointed my people in one way or another, or who act, with rich people's, you know what I mean? They only care about, this particular part of the population in the past. So you kind of feel like even if you were to mobilize and you were to be civically engaged, it isn't going to do anything. It's that misconception that needs to be dismantled with education and participation in these programs.
Wow, that was actually that long.
Still processing.
I'm like, okay. So yes, give her snaps. That was amazing. I would also add that there are so many different entry points for folks, and that it becomes unclear what the correct entry point to getting involved in the, and specifically the electoral process. When we say civically engaging, there's a variety of ways you can engage civically, but I think we're speaking directly to voting and being involved in the electoral process. And folks may not know where to get a voter registration card. Folks may not know where to turn that card in. Folks may not know that there are time limits. Folks may not know that you can vote online. Not vote online, pardon me, register to vote online. Chicago Votes has done a lot of work to break down those systematic barriers between young people of color and voting. We've passed online voter registration, same-day voter registration, and automatic voter registration because we recognize that not everybody knows the entire playbook. And some may believe that's by design, some may believe because it's just not a cultural or social norm for young people to engage in the electoral process, but making sure that we dismantle those systemic barriers that stand in the way of young people engaging in the process is how we're going to make sure that it's easier to at least engage in what's really important, which is the substance, which is who is running, what are the issues, when is the election, where can I go, versus how do I get registered, am I sure if I'm on the rolls, do I need to bring an ID, what does that look like? Making those processes easier is going to make young people's engagement even that much more beautiful and just vibrant than what we're hoping it to be.
I think if I may add this, just looking at some of the issues that politicians are often running on or they deem important. From a millennial perspective, I feel like I'm a person who values multi-dimensions, compounded type of issues where I'm not only concerned about immigration, I'm concerned about racial or economic justice, right? Whereas I think traditionally people have only had like one issue that they're solely so focused on, and it's easy to just process your candidate based on that if it's just one issue. The fact that we have like student loans as being one of the primary concerns that we have in our generation, where some of us are in $250,000 debt because, schools, like literally universities are becoming so expensive, but also so easy to get a loan, but not knowing that this is going to keep you in slavery, basically, in a financial slavery where you have a job and all you're doing all your life is paying off student loans. So having issues that are relatable to us, but also having issues that are multi-dimensional is going to be a way for us to engage as a population, right? Because we are a generation that's defined by tolerance, right? The first time ever where we're not only concerned about our group that we identify with, but we're also concerned about the people next door, right? Just because an issue doesn't hit us personally, we care about it because we've seen what that divisive or division language does to a community, right? And we've just realize that we want to be that generation of like tolerance, generation of love, generation of equality and equity, right, in our society, because it's time that we have that change happening, and I think our generation is going to be that group that leads that fight, and we're very proud of that.
Anybody else on the panel? No? Okay. Before we get into that, there was another barrier I was hoping someone would touch on. So if someone on the panel could define adultism and how it impacts space, in case there's anyone in the audience that doesn't know what adultism is. Everybody's staring at Asia.
So adultism refers to oppression coming from an adult authority figure upon a youth, essentially emphasizing the idea that your kid, you don't know anything because you're a kid, to sit down, you're a kid, your voice, you're a kid, you're a kid, you're a kid. Basically, that sums it up.
That's a good sum up.
And it really undermines the capability and invalidates youth authority, youth voice, and just youth existence in general. My particular experience, adultism is very common in school-like settings. That's where youth spend most of their time before they go on to the workforce, and it is often very common, you know, to hear amongst teachers and administrators speaking to youth as if they're dumb and, you know, metaphorically speaking, mansplaining things to them and talking down to them and just treating them like they're stupid and undermining their intelligence and assuming that, you know, greater concepts, oh, they don't know, you know, what would you know about this? You know, and sometimes, you know, my grandmother says that and she's joking when she means it, but repetitively just hearing that, oh, what do you know? You know, you don't, you know, it undermines youth, and it essentially causes you to internalize this low self-esteem and just the belief that although I'm a youth, although I'm only 18 years old, although I've never had a real job, right, I can't do anything. And so that creates this sort of apathetic attitude that leads to a lot of youth just like sitting back and lacking motivation, you know, because of this misconception that they're just a kid.
That was perfect, because part of the reason why I wanted someone to hit upon that is adultism. It's, you know, becoming a sexy word, people are talking about it more, but it is pervasive. And until we, authority figures, leaders, etc., the adults, don't create that space and don't challenge our own adultism that creeps up, we're not creating space then for younger generations to be fully engaged. And so that's why I wanted someone to touch upon that on the panel. So thank you, Deja, for letting us put you on the spot. Obviously, the definition of millennials is 18 and older, right? But what about high school students? What about middle school students? So can any of you talk about, I don't know if any of your work or if you've done anything to engage an even younger population in civics, in demystifying the process, etc.?
So I coordinate the voice program at Gage Park High School, and so I take students to Springfield as well as, so Voice is an overall collaborative organization that's made up of other organizations. So the organization that I work for is SWAP, and they're the incubator for that neighborhood. So students from all over the city actually gets to go to Springfield and to engage in like that civic activity, and I feel like just really promoting that and giving students the opportunity to see like how power is made, and giving them like a voice, because like a lot of times they don't really have decisions and what laws is passed, especially if you're under 18. You know, you can't vote people in office, you can't do a lot of things, but giving them this opportunity, kind of changing the narrative that even though you're under 18, you still have a big say in what's going on around you.
I came to Chicago to do Teach for America, and one of my, the first school that I worked with was actually middle school here in North Lawndale, and then I moved far south in Roseland my second year, and I taught middle school 8th graders, and I also taught 6th graders. And I think about my own personal experience with respect to being civically engaged and also being interested in government and how government works, especially in this country. I wanted to pass that down to my students, right? So it could be as basic as learning about the process, right? What branches of governments do we have, and why is it so beautiful in comparison to other countries, right? So that's something that I really value. I think sometimes when something becomes very common, we lose our value for that thing, right? Because it's so common, right? And democracy in this country is so beautiful. As someone who's come from a country that's lived under authoritarian, I share with my students that we didn't vote every day, and if you did vote, you actually knew that your vote did not matter. But here it does, right? And I think there could be a stigma where, you know, my vote doesn't matter, but it does. It really does. If we all thought that, a million of us thought that, and we stayed home, that's a disastrous thing that could happen in this country. And knowing that the next day when the results come out, we're not going to have people out committing a civil war, right? That's something that we should not take for granted. But it does happen every day, and there's a country in this world that's happening. So just giving people perspective and giving people the value of what they have and how they can continue to keep that value is really important. So just just really cultivating that in my students, that was something that's really important for me. Additionally, I think it's so important to give kids a why in their education, right? Why is it so important? So find a connection, find an issue that's so close to you, and linked it to that subject. It really gets students going, right? I had a kid who's so angry about the lunch menu at the school, and I was just like, you can do something about it. Here's the process. So just giving them that, that foundation, and that they can take an action, and there's a system, though not perfect, that you can work within to get something, perfected or something corrected. So just sort of that thinking.
So I need to jump to the next question because we have 2 minutes left. No, you're fine. But I want to pick up on something you said, which is a perfect segue. I would be remiss if I did not point out that at our recent Illinois primary, only 3% of the millennial population voted. So incredibly low compared to presidential elections, et cetera. So why? Why do we think that the millennial generation did not turn out to vote in this last Illinois primary? Do we think the same thing's going to happen for the general election? Obviously, 2018, 2019 coming up is going to be chock full of elections at different levels. So just wanted to hear panelists' thoughts on why there was such a low turnout. And then I believe we're opening up for questions, or no? 1 or 2 questions.
I'll try to keep my answer really quick. The reason that youth voter turnout was so low in the primary is no one turns out in a primary election. Folks turn out for the big shiny presidential election and then really veer away from local elections. That's a trend we've always seen, and that's a trend that we're trying to defeat through some fun tactics like making voting a little bit more engaging, like hosting a parade to the poll, or having students create a voter guide, giving folks opportunity to get their hands dirty and actually start to organize. I think that we need to teach our people how to organize. Teach them about self-interest, about how you see those issues that you really care about, and how you translate that to action. And it may not be through voting. It may be through starting a grassroots campaign to start a community garden. It may be something as small and an introductory as, bringing people together to write a letter to your local alderman. Like, it could be very small, isolated events that will eventually build up folks to get out and actually engage and vote in elections. That's how you build a base. That's how you build people, a community of people who care about the same things that you care about. I think that we need to teach more young people how to organize, and once they recognize their self-interest and they recognize their power as an individual and as a community, that you'll start to see that translating at the polls as well.
Question from the audience. Tim's staring at me. Is there a question from the audience?
Do we have time?
Great. I have lots of questions, but I'll do very, very stimulating discussion. I want to go back to adultism. As one who probably practices it. But, if I look at when I was your age, I also had elders who thought I was a child and didn't have experience and all the rest of it. So it's not unique necessarily to your generation. I'm just curious, why has this become such a big issue? Because we've all faced that, where we're told we're young and we don't have experience or whatever. Why has it become such a big issue for you in a way that maybe it wasn't for us in our generation?
I think part of it is the millennial generation is I want to phrase this carefully. We're not a demographic that cares a lot about conforming to the right way of being a way. Talk this way, wear your suit this way, do this particular type of program. We are very authentic, very self-driven people, black, white, and everybody in between. And so I think that makes it difficult, sort of if there's a cognitive dissonance, I guess.
And for me personally, it gets annoying, like hearing it from like the adults. And then, we really social media heavy, so that's all we see on social media sometimes. And like just having that constant message, it just gets like really annoying and encouraging.
I wouldn't. Okay, I'm sorry, Pastor Sonia. I wouldn't say that it's a growing issue, so to speak. I would just say that extremely important that it be eliminated now, perhaps more
But
so.
not the adults eliminated, just.
I'm not pointing any fingers. I'm just saying in general. And I think it's no. I'm not pointing fingers. I didn't mean to do so. But I think it's extremely important that we eliminate that factor due to the fact that I feel, I don't know the statistics of this, but I feel like there has been somewhat of a decrease in black roles in politics. I feel like, my grandma was coming up, she had this figure to look towards, and then this black mayor is running for office, and I feel like the adultism wasn't as impactful because you had these constant black representations encouraging you to do so. So perhaps in the past, when adultism did, when you were oppressed in any way or shape or form by adultism, it didn't impact you as much as it is impacting millennials because of the spheres have changed in terms of our roles in politics and our participation in these in different fields. It's not as great or is not as emphasized or as present as it was then. So.
That being said, hey, can we give a hand for the Thank you, Deja. Thank you, Devontae. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michelle, for facilitating this. Before we let you go, there is a sheet that I dropped off on your table. There are 5 tables. Coincidentally, there are 5 millennials that will join each table. And what we want to do today is invite you into the conversation where you help. The goal is for us to work intergenerationally. Whether we like it or not, for the next 20 years, every day for the next 20 years, a baby boomer turns 65. So this group is not in the batter's box, or they at the plate. There's a transfer taking place all over the country in every business sector, across every generation, and you need to learn how to work with this group. They're going to be late, and they're going to have a Starbucks cup in their hand. So you need to know how to deal with it. But no, I would just invite you to, that can be a talking point when you get to the table. But hey, just take a look at this action plan right here. The goal is to create an action plan to work intergenerationally, civically, and politically. It's just something, an opportunity for you to work alongside these individuals, this generation, and just to create something. We'll probably have 5 minutes to hear from a table about what they believe these next steps are to work intergenerationally. So if you guys can just pick a table, and we'll report back in like 10 minutes. We had 20, cut it to 10.
I'll take 1 minute and give my other minute to someone else. Hey everybody, I'm Janae, and we talked about a lot of things, but I think the one that stood out the most was being more thoughtful about when we invite younger people or millennials into certain space, that it's not just window dressing, that we are actually either giving them real opportunities to make a difference and to give their input and their opinion, or we're actually stepping out of the way and saying, you take the lead on this initiative that's important to you because you absolutely have the capacity to do so. And we're not just inviting you here for pictures and, oh yes, we heard your opinion, but we're really going to do what we already planned to do before you even got here. So making sure that they're in the space and that they're either taking the lead or making meaningful contributions.
Hello everyone, I'm Crystal. So we talked about several things, but one is, we talked about there's a divide. So, definitely hear, and understand the feeling about adultism, but there's also something that's the opposite of adultism. We don't know what the name of it is, but on the other side, there's a feeling like, one side thinks that they're being told to sit down and shut up, and the other side is being, told, well, you're not relevant anymore and just, go away and leave us alone. And so how do you, create that space? So I think the next step in the action plan is really to, find ways to build relationship and to continue conversation and look for opportunities for stewardship that, the Gen X and baby boomers, have this knowledge, and it's knowledge to share, and it's not knowledge to lord over, but it's knowledge to figure out how to steward and how to create a framework and a space for millennials to then come in and, and fill. And so how do we continue to how do we find better ways and new ways to do that?
Hey, I'm Darius Ballinger. And I think we talked about the same thing, creating an inviting space, having shared goals with kind of all generations. But something unique that I shared with the table that we kind of had a collective discussion around is that young people kind of different from baby boomers in the sense that baby boomers were moved to crises, right? They were the war on drugs, the war on poverty, the war. And I guarantee if you go back into your respective spaces with the young people that you work with, the millennials that you work with, and you approach it from an opportunity point, like, okay, here's the challenge, how can we solve it, right? Because millennials aren't moved by the crises. We've been well aware that there's issues and there's challenges and it's systemic, and so that we're not worried about what we can't do, we're more so interested in what we can do. And so speaking to them from an opportunity standpoint versus a crisis.
So we identified 2 ways that we can facilitate this intergenerational collaboration. The first is just through mentorships, but particularly authentic mentorships where career professionals are taking a genuine and sincere interest in younger folks as they are. And Veronica was suggesting that the more informal way of doing that tends to work better for her, and I think most of us would agree to that versus like something that's super contrived probably is more lasting. And then the other thing that we came up with was, sorry, it's early, y'all.
Understanding the space.
All right, understanding the spaces that millennials are in, and I think somebody else already talked to that, and just identifying those spaces as legitimate platforms to have this cross collaboration happen, and then letting the younger people lead it.
So our table focused on what would success look like, and there were a couple of key points that we all, I think, kind of landed on the same page around. First and foremost was we have to be comfortable with young people being in charge. It's not good enough to just have them in the room, part of the conversation. We have to get to a place where we're comfortable with them being decision makers and actually moving things forward without the older generation actually being in charge. The second piece was finding places where we have shared goals and shared objectives. And what ties to that is what drives us. If we're an older generation, there are certain things that drive us to try to achieve success. The same thing can be said for millennials, but the driver is different. We're both heading in the same direction, but what drives us, what charges us up is a little bit different. And how do we tap into that youth, the energy rather that the youth have to get to that place? And then I'll end with one point is this notion of creating forums where we work side by side. We constantly hear that the youth are doing things on one side of the equation, the adults are doing something on the other side. How do we find a place where we're actually on the same side of the equation and the same working together?
So thank you guys. As I mentioned earlier, there is a transfer taking place in our country, and that transfer, there's a proper exchange that needs to take place. And I mentioned this 2 years ago in the conversation that Suzanne and I created at the Walnut Room. In the 2004, 2008 Olympics, Athens and Beijing, the 4x4 100 relay for the men and women, they were predicted to win the gold both years. 2 years in a row, they lost the gold because of a botched exchange. That's how important this transfer is from one generation to the next. We are predicted to win gold in our community, in the different sectors, in the different cultures, everything that makes up our community. But a botched exchange can ruin it all. And so that's what this conversation was about. We didn't solve all of our problems, but again, we're trying to make a healthy transfer as we know this transfer is taking place generationally. Hey, don't forget about the survey. If you haven't taken it already, take it before you leave. There's folders just outside this room where you can get more information about UCAN and more information about African American legacy. And then I would be remiss if I didn't thank Cassandra, our amazing teammate, Cassandra Sampson. Give her a hand. Trust, UCAN for allowing us in this space, and Mr. Clark Robinson, CAN TV for hooking us up, putting us on camera so our mothers can see this. Our caterer, everybody that made this take place, the panelists, Ms. Michelle Morales. Thank you guys. I hope you have a great on the table day. Have a great day.